Hi, my name's Phil and I'm bringing this old canoe stern motorboat back to life. Her name is Jabiru and she's 88 years old. This episode is going to deal with the rebuilding of the side decks. It's a fairly lengthy process, so I'll probably have to split it over 2 episodes, 11 and 12. But before we get into the side decks, here's a little update on the running gear, new propeller and new stern tube and a couple of other things. So hope you enjoy it. Glenn from DH Porters said the gear would be ready before Christmas, and true to his word, I got the phone call a couple of days before we stopped work for the Christmas break. Here's the shiny new prop. Glenn says it should push this boat along at about 9 knots, which will be nice. The existing fibre bearing was left as is in the stern bearing, and a new stern tube now connects the rear bearing to the stuffing box. That is the existing stuffing box. A new coupling has also been fitted to the existing shaft, which had a slight bend and had to be straightened. All this running gear is now ready to be fitted when the time comes. Well, I've countersunk a lot of these bolts on the port side, and I'm in the middle of removing the bolts in the starboard side. Up forward, under the forward deck, a lot of them are in the way of deck beams, so I have to actually grind the heads off and punch them back in, which is what I'm doing here. So those ones aren't punched back in yet, but whichever ones I can, I will. I've also removed bolts from the stem and countersunk them and put them back in. So now it's off to remove the side decks, and I'll be able to get at the beam shelf and rebolt them properly. I don't know if you can see it clearly or not, but the camber of the side decks are so steep that it was almost impossible to walk along without being in danger of sliding off. Also, the side decks were just not comfortably wide enough, so I'm making them about 70 millimetres wider than they were, so they now should be about 250 millimetres wide, which should be just nice to walk along without a tow rail. I had considered shortening the foredeck about 300 millimetres to make more space and headroom in the forward cabin around the double bunk, which will be there. However, I decided against that, just for the amount of work that it was, and I just cut off the overhang up to the main beam. That added about another 100 millimetres of cabin space going forward. Every little bit counts in a boat as small as Jabiru. The existing side decks were a bit of a puzzle. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about how they were made, but I am mystified about why they were like this. A beam shelf was fitted near the shear line, about 20 millimetres below, where it would normally have been the depth of a deck beam below the shear so the beams could be properly fitted. Pieces of hardwood about 25 millimetres deep by 140 wide were then glued in a haphazard way to the top of this beam shelf. Both the beam shelf and the hardwood pieces were at right angles to the shape of the hull, and of course this varied as it went from aft to the forward end. This is the reason the side decks had varying and very steep camber. So then there's another piece here.
Right, yes, which is just sort of sitting on that edge there.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I made up a deck beam pattern, which is an approximation of somewhere between the cambers on the foredeck and the aft deck. The fore and aft deck cambers are a little different from each other, and neither are parts of a true circle as camber should be. I don't want to take this boat completely apart and rebuild it, so I'll live with those differences, which won't be very noticeable once the side decks are fed in and the cabin's in place. If noticeable, it will only add to the quaint appearance of an old boat which has had many opinions inflicted upon it. I'm cutting the angle at the shear line to suit this new camber, and that will give a starting point for rebuilding the side decks. I've decided to make the aft deck a little bit shorter. It's taking up quite a lot of boat. I can take on another 360 millimeters of cockpit space, which will be really helpful. So I'm just cutting off the rear deck, and I'm going to move this beam back under that line. Well, that aft deck has now been cut off and the deck beam glued in place, and I'll fasten it later on. Same deck beam that was there, just cut it down and moved it back, refitted it. So just sitting on that beam shelf with a bolt through it. And the same on this side. There'll be a post that will go either side of a door, because there'll be bunks or seats, fore and aft seats in this cockpit, and then there'll be a locker in the centre there. So that'll help support the deck and hold the boat together. As you saw near the start of this episode, all of the beam shelf fastening bolts were removed, countersunk and refitted. The same had to be done with the nail and rove riveted fastenings along the shear line. With the side decks out of the way, this became an easier process. You'll notice some of the riveting had to be done with a punch, as the fastenings were in some places just too close to the beam shelf. You might remember I received a pile of Oregon roof beams from a builder with the intention of laminating cabin roof beams and whatever else was needed as the work progresses. To rebuild the side decks, I decided to laminate full-length carlins to hold the inner ends of the side deck beams. Normally the deck beams would sit on top of the beam shelf, so all the fitting could be done from above with the carlin in place. In this case, the deck beam outer ends must fit under the beam shelf, so they can't be fitted and fastened after the carlin's in place. So I've decided to assemble the carlins to the correct angle and shape on the boat. Each carlin is made up of 3 laminations from pieces of Oregon scarfed and glued to the approximate shape of the shear line. To achieve this, I fitted a series of wedges to the side of the hull and at the inward angle of 1.5 degrees. That's the angle I've decided to have the cabin sides away from vertical. And the laminations are to be clamped to these wedges for gluing. I haven't built a big boat for more than 50 years, so I'm hoping a 1.5 degree cabin side angle will look okay. If you know better, please message me before I fit the cabin sides. This method probably doesn't make much sense as you watch it now, but there are a few good reasons why I have to do it this way, and all will be clear in the next episode. Well, that's all there is for episode 11. These side decks are taking up quite a lot of time, so I'll be spreading that process into the next episode and probably to the end of that as well before they're finished. So I've enjoyed making this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it, and I look forward to putting up the next one as soon as I possibly can. Thanks for watching. Bye.